This demonstration is going to show you how to make a clay form using a stamp or a mold to impress into the clay to get your design, which you should have previously done from the other assignments. So I've got my plaster stamp right here, I've got the linoleum stamp from my printmaking right here, and I can use both or one or the other to make an impression of a design into my clay today. I've got the clay that you should have received in your bag. If you have a rolling pin that you can use for this, that you can clean up well, you can use a rolling pin, or you can use the piece of PVC pipe or the dowel rod, whichever was included in your supplies that went home. I've also got a loop tool for carving some designs, a wooden modeling tool for affecting the texture, and then I've got a fork with some slip, which is just clay that has been whisked in there, put in with the fork and mixed up with some water. So this is a very wet slurry of clay. I'm going to use that as a glue when I join pieces together. The clay that I've got, I want to work on a hard surface that's easy to clean, like a countertop. I want to avoid finished wood. Don't do this on your coffee table or on a nice finished desk. A piece of tempered glass would be okay as well. And if this is stiffened up over the course of getting home, if it's not as easy to work with, if it's not in that plastic stage where I can easily manipulate it, I can pierce it with some holes with my fork, put some water in it, close it up tightly in the bag and rehydrate it to some extent. I'm going to force it down to start with my hands and then use my roller. When I roll this clay out, I want to get a nice even slab, avoiding any kind of speed bumps in the middle. I can flip it. If it's sticking to the roller, either my roller is wet or the clay is too wet, and I can flip it each time to make sure it sticks a little bit less. Working on the canvas or a piece of cloth should help that. A good slab for slab building should be about 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe slightly thicker, maybe slightly thinner, depending on how delicate of a form I want to make. So I've got a longer slab, and it's not very tall. It might be, if I trim this down, about a good height for something like a coffee mug or a small cup. And I should have plenty of extra clay from trimming this down to make a base for that. Once I'm sure that my slab is fairly even, I'm going to impress my design on there, also using the roller and some even pressure. Just want to ensure that it gets deep enough to get the design. So I've got two pretty good impressions on there. I'm going to use the clean modeling tool to trim the ends. You can also use a butter knife to do this at home. Just make sure you clean it up afterwards. Okay, and I've got a relatively even rectangle here that if I carefully handle this, I can prop up and gradually bend in. If I do this gradually, it should reduce the cracks on the outside. And when I get to a point where I can join these together to make a cylinder for my cup or mug, I'm going to trim down at an angle, which would be better done with a knife, but I can do fairly well with this as long as it's clean. I've cut this at a little bit of a lap. I'm going to cut this to underlap it. And then I need to use my fork to score or rough up the edge. It doesn't have to be pretty. I'm just trying to create more surface area for that slip to go into and trying to rough the surface of that clay up. And I can pack on a generous amount of the slip. And then without messing up my designs on the outside, I want to squeeze those together. I should see some of the slip come out. That way I know I have a good bond. I can use my modeling tool to scrape up and hide that seam. And I'll go back and address the rim, clean up the rim after this is attached to a base. So right now I have just a cylinder. There's no base at the bottom. I have plenty of clay left to re-wedge. I'm going to spray a little bit of water in there, get it wet, and wedge that back together. So I'm going to work out any of the air pockets that were formed by pushing away from myself and then pulling it kind of into a spiral. So it's spiraling all that clay together, working the air bubbles out. I'm going to start to flatten it again. This time I need a base that's just slightly thicker. I want room at the bottom to carve a foot later on, which is going to be a ring that my cup sits on, instead of having a flat bottom, which is going to scratch the tabletop or surface that it's on. So this one's a little bit thicker. If I trim down the side here, I can see it's closer to 1/2 inch. The reason I want to cut my slab or leave it larger is I'm going to take this and trace the outside and trim around that so it will fit my vessel, not the other way around. It's harder to eyeball or make a base that's going to fit that. I can always trim off any excess here later on after it's attached. So I still have some extra clay that I could use to make a handle if I wanted to. Again, anytime I'm attaching something, I want to score and add slip. And I want to worry about how well it's attached first and then the texture afterwards. Score the base as well as the bottom that's going to attach to the base. I've kept my hands pretty clean. I can wipe off any excess clay so that I don't get any crumbs on the design of my cup. And I also want to go back with a little bit of slip here. And I'm going to kind of squeeze with even pressure so that I'm not crushing my design. On the inside, if I can't reach all the way to the bottom, I can use the modeling tool to help squeeze towards the base, making sure it's joined everywhere. Wouldn't want anything leaking out the bottom, so need to make sure that that seam is closed. And my extra clay I can always keep in the bag depending on how fast I'm working. I don't want to let that dry out too much. Now that this is attached to the base, I can go back, make sure that my rim is round, as circular as possible. And I can make sure that this seam is totally clean all the way around on the outside. Use the modeling tool, get towards the inside here, on that inside edge. I don't want any roughness on the inside of the cup, and I don't want any unnecessary roughness that's not part of my design on the outside. So that is the start of my vessel. I can take a small piece of plastic and go around the rim here. So if you have a small piece off of your plastic bag that you can tear off, I can round the rim with even pressure going around, and that's going to give me a much better texture than trying to use a sponge or something else. So there's my completed vessel. At the end I can carve out a little bit from the bottom here so that I've got more of a ring for this to sit on. That would be if I wanted to have a plate or bowl or cup. I could add a handle here where the seam is to help further hide the seam. But the vessel itself has this design in it. If I wanted to, I could also go back, use these empty voids here, and now that this is already formed,